Did you want to go into the whiteboard and maybe sketch some things out for some people? I know you
Yeah,
had
let's
mentioned
talk
that.
about we can talk about a couple of different ways that, and I'm going to kind of talk about the global estate planning that we would have. So if we can, let's see. Now is this a whiteboard that I can draw on here? Let me maximize this. So if we're looking at, let's see. Okay, so if we have an individual here, and this person has got, they're probably going to want a couple of different trusts. I'll start by saying that. For their day-to-day assets, they're probably going to want a revocable living trust. That will hold property that is under debts. Like for example, if you have a residence that you're still making mortgage payments on, you're probably going to want to have that in a revocable trust because every time that you're paying your mortgage, to pay that mortgage, you're making a contribution to trust. And that kind of goes back to the comment I just made about putting property into a trust. In order to do an asset protection trust, which is the bigger trust we'll talk about, a domestic asset protection trust, if you're going to put, say, a big crypto, a bunch of crypto into there, if you're holding that crypto individually, whatever tokens or coins or assets
NFTs
you're
could
holding,
be any kind of digital asset, right?
NFTs, whatever kind of digital assets you're holding, and that would be the broader category. I'm just going to write crypto for short. Before you even put it in there, let's just, we have to look at what's the value. And then we have to decide, is that going to be under less than the 12.2 that we currently have? If it's less than, then we can go ahead and use your lifetime exemption and file a 709 return and put it in here. But before we even do that, first step is to make sure that we, in most states, have a liquidity analysis. We have to make sure you're liquid and have an affidavit of solvency. In order to get the protection, a lot of states require that you show that you're not trying to duck out of paying your creditors. Otherwise, they'll pierce right through this. It's just like a corporate or an LLC structure. If you leave yourself illiquid, you can't dodge away from known creditors or potential lawsuits or threats of lawsuits. You have to first show that you're solvent, and that takes a liquidity analysis. And then we can transfer a bunch of this into here. Now, often I would recommend that you're going to want to put those inside of here, probably into a limited liability company of their own. And one of the reasons you might want to do that is, especially if you're going to do valuation discounts, because you can give some of that ownership, maybe 2% to one kid, maybe 5% to another, and maybe whatever, 2% to somebody else. If I can get good numbers. No, that's not very, let's see if I can get these
That's all
to look
right.
clear.
So 2%,
Percentages look
5%,
like, yeah,
and
percentages
2%
look
there.
more like numbers. We'll get these cleared up real quick. So if you got, there we go. You might want to split up some interests in this LLC, and that can give you a valuation discount, like I mentioned earlier. We have to get an appraisal though. So that's a step if we're going to do that. But the LLC, if you were, say, owning shares in a DAO, a lot of DAOs currently don't even have a legal status. They've not organized under Wyoming law. They've not organized, Vermont's got a law. There's a few states putting out DAO legislation. It's unclear whether you're going to be taxed even as an international partnership, subject to a bunch of the international partnership tax rules and regulations. So putting these assets first into an LLC makes sense to make sure that any disasters that occur here and liabilities that occur here can get contained in this disaster containment unit. And then again, you can split up the interests and get some amount of creditor protection. An LLC with multiple owners, with these extra owners, gets more protection than an LLC owned 100% by this particular trust. So often we'll fund them into an LLC first. And if you own a bunch of, say, NFTs, having an LLC for your collection can make some sense so that we got these kind of segregated from other assets, because you're probably also going to put other assets in here. For example, you might have, and I'd always draw partnerships or LLCs as triangles. You might have a rental property or two or three or four. Little pro tip, each rental property should be in its own LLC structure.
Yep.
And I'll note that a lot of people will ask me, well, what about series LLCs? They've done enough research that they've heard of series LLCs. Can I just do one ring to control them all? One LLC to control them all? And my short answer on series LLCs is, while they are an excellent device to avoid needing to re-register Delaware corporations for securities or other regulatory purposes over and over and over, you'll set up one LLC that's registered and then be able to do multiple activities in it. They don't play well with federal bankruptcy rules. And so even though many states authorize the creation of series LLCs, if somebody pushes you into bankruptcy, they can pierce through the cells inside of a series LLC potentially under a bankruptcy proceeding and set aside those cells and not acknowledge the separate ownership structures as separate juridical entities. So I'd
The
be a
only
little.
thing I will say to that is Tennessee allows for each LLC in the series to function as its own LLC. So Tennessee has changed their legislation to address that. And I know that there are some states that are kind of watching to see how that plays out in Tennessee laws. But I would argue that the Tennessee series LLC is a significantly better, or an improvement over the Delaware, where they're treated as DBAs essentially. Tennessee treats them as separate LLCs, which is good.
Yeah, different states have different, their divisions of corporations or secretaries of state have different policies and rules and regulations, so they can create issues. Now, I believe, is it Tennessee that does not allow an S corporation at the state level? There's a couple states that don't allow S corps. There's some funny idiosyncrasies between states and the types of entities they acknowledge. So
Tennessee recognizes an LLC as taxed for S corp, but doesn't recognize the S corp as an entity, which is strange. But yes, that is true. It's a weird.
Yeah, funny. I think it's one of a couple states with that particular issue. So, but yeah, on series LLCs, I'd urge you caution. And then also, I would never use an LLC, a series LLC in a state for a rental property in a state that does not recognize them. So in other words, you wouldn't want to organize a Tennessee series LLC for a property that you're going to own in, I don't know, Georgia. If Georgia, and I don't know whether Georgia's rules on series LLCs, but even if they did recognize them, they may not acknowledge Tennessee law as concerns series LLC, because real estate, especially if you're talking rental properties, real estate, any state that has dirt in it has quasi in rem jurisdiction over their dirt. Like, you cannot yank that real estate out of the earth and move it to Tennessee. So the state says, we don't care what kind of entity you think owns it. You're not going to alienate our dirt from our state. And so there, you're not going to be able to drill to the center of the earth and take your little slice of Georgia and put it in Tennessee. So they will exercise their dominion over that real estate anyway. So make sure that your state recognizes series LLCs in the way they do if you are going to use them. But I generally disfavor series LLCs because of those limitations I just mentioned. You've got to make sure your portfolio only has LLCs with the right types of laws over them, or that your LLC and your real estate match up on laws. But as far as a series LLC or an LLC over crypto, we don't have that quasi in rem jurisdiction issue over it. So you can organize an LLC over, I guess you could almost call it stateless assets based in the cloud. You could choose to organize them anywhere. I really like, for crypto, I really like Wyoming LLCs. And I'd mentioned that Wyoming has also led the way with DAOs. For having the first, I guess the world's second DAO
legislature.
Yep. So that's kind of a nice feature to Wyoming, that they're leading the way, just like they led the way with the limited liability company. They're leading the way with Wyoming Dows. You don't need to organize your LLC as a DAO. However, I would mention that I have organized some LLCs with numerous numerous types of NFTs or other crypto-based assets as Wyoming Dows, because they do have algorithmic-based governance. And that is kind of an interesting feature that allows you to create heuristics or rules for your assets that is really not available in other areas, and allows you to shift some of the fiduciary responsibilities to an algorithm. This is kind of a new concept. It's in its infancy, and I always mention that algorithms are rapid idiots. If your algorithm is incorrectly configured, you'll rapidly find yourself in some sort of an idiocy. So you have to make sure that your algorithms are fairly limited, because heuristics lead to rapid results, and those may not be the results you rapidly wanted to happen. But as far as a jurisdiction for cryptocurrencies, for NFTs, for DAOs, I really favor Wyoming, because they've led the way in getting their money transmitter laws in place, have got the best definitions and the most infrastructure, institutional infrastructure, the impetus behind their LLC law for cryptocurrency and for smart contract based organizations. So very much in favor of that. But we'll often hold these inside of an asset protection trust. Why do both? Well, the answer is that if this person over here that set all this up, if we have a problem from them, we have to keep in mind that the liability can go downstream from them, or it could go upstream from the LLC. So in other words, if you want to be protected from your digital assets, if you want to be protected from your renters, then you need to put your renters in an LLC. You need to put your digital assets in an LLC if you want to be protected from them. That's, from your perspective, that's protection from an outsider, protection from an outside liability. However, if you shank a golf ball on the golf course, or maybe more likely run over somebody with your car, or your dog bites somebody, or one of your renters gets hopped up on who knows what, and you get in a personal altercation, that's an inside liability. And so rather than somebody from the outside going upstream, they're kind of contained in these disaster containment units. They're contained in these LLCs. They can't go upstream to you. You're protected from outside liabilities by the LLCs. But if you personally cause somebody a problem, if you have a personal malfeasance, a personal tort, they can say, what do you own? What are your properties that you own? And if you say, well, I've protected everything in LLCs, they'll say, thank you for protecting everything for me in LLCs. Give me your LLCs. They will go downstream from you. Your inside liability will go downstream, and they will take over these things. The trust, with an asset protection trust, you have an affidavit of solvency, and then to get the money back out, you can maintain a lot of control over it. So what we have is a distribution trustee, but you cannot maintain checkbook control. You can maintain management control, where you get to trade and change your currency around, keeping in mind the tax consequences. You can change around your different holdings inside. You can sell this rental. You can get a loan on it and buy life insurance, or you could buy another rental. You can do all those things. But to distribute your money out, you have to have a distribution trustee who has purse string control. And let's say you one day decided, you had an epiphany that you wanted to take your favorite friends on a cruise, Disney cruise, let's say. I just got back from Disney World recently, and you wanted to you had this epiphany that you want to liquidate all your assets. Good, you can do that. You're the management trustee. Liquidate them tomorrow if you want. But if you want to pull out all that money and cut a big check to Disney to rent out their cruise boat for your favorite friends, your distribution trustee might say, no, I don't want to do that. In which case, you can look at the terms of this trust. This is a trust agreement. It's a contract. And the distribution trustee is bound by the terms of this contract, this trust contract. And you could say to the trustee, well, the contract says I can have my money out as long as I'm not giving it to creditors. I don't owe Disney a dime. I'm not giving it to a creditor. I'm just giving it to a company to give a cruise for my best friends. And that trustee is bound to give you your money. Or you can go to your trust protector, all right, trust protector, and they will look at the contract, the trust contract, and say, it doesn't look like this distribution trustee is following the contract. You are pulling out your money for a permissible purpose. And so that trust protector is bound to follow the terms of your contract. So they will replace your distribution trustee, aka fire or terminate them, and replace them with a new distribution trustee who will hold to the terms of your trust agreement, your contract. So you kind of have the ability to make sure that that trust contract is kept. Now, the one thing I mentioned is that trust contract does provide you cannot distribute funds from this trust for purposes of paying off a creditor. And that's why on the way in, you have to make sure there's no creditors. The coast is clear before you put your assets in, because you cannot pay off creditors on your way out. And so that distribution trustee will ask you, well, are you pulling out your money to pay off a creditor? And if the answer is, well, yeah, I'm scared. A lawsuit came in and they're suing me for everything that I own in my revocable trust, because this is revocable. This trust is revocable. And they can get that from you because you own it in a trust that they'll just tell you to revoke, and then you can turn it over. They can take these things from you. Obviously, there's some homestead exemption protection on a house. And if you have IRAs or 401ks, they're outside of the trust. And most creditor exemption statutes protect those. So there's a lot of protection out of the trust. But these assets, there's no creditor protection from those. So somebody suing you can't get at these, and you cannot liquidate them and give it to somebody suing you. So that is why people set these up, because again, the LLCs protect you from your renters, they protect you from your digital assets, but LLCs do not protect your digital assets or your rentals from your personal activities. So by combining this, it's like double bagging your groceries. You protect yourself from inside and outside liabilities. You protect yourself from upstream and downstream creditor attacks. We started by talking about tax, and I shifted over to asset protection. But I would point out to you that you want to have both reasons for doing your planning. You don't want to do tax planning in isolation from asset protection planning and estate planning. So you'll name beneficiaries on this as well. In a dynasty trust, you'll have your beneficiaries as well that it'll ultimately distribute to. And you may have terms like it won't distribute until they're, maybe the first third goes when they're 25, the next third, the next half of the remaining, the next third goes when they're 35, and then the remainder when they're 45. So you do some estate planning, but by doing the trifecta of planning for your estate, who it goes to out of these trusts, planning for taxes, and planning for asset protection, you fortify all of those. Because if you do asset protection in isolation, it might get set aside by a court as a sham. If you do tax planning in isolation, could be considered a sham or lacking in economic substance. So you kind of want to do all three at once, and that's where the careful planning comes in.
Yeah, that was great. I think there are a lot of gems there for people, especially if you're new to this stuff, and you'll probably have to go back and listen to it. I know I will a couple different times to make sure that I'm getting everything from that. Yeah, fantastic presentation there. You had mentioned that with the advent of DAOs and smart contracts and a lot of these things, if you set up a DAO, do you think that there'll ever be an instance where they have the trustee to a trust is an algorithm in some way?
I think that they will, most of the financial institution acts for different states require either a trust company to meet certain bonding and other requirements, or they specifically exempt. For example, I've seen CPAs be exempt from the financial institutions trustee requirements, or certified financial planners, CFPs, exempt from those requirements. They would have to change the Financial Institutions Act to authorize algorithmic management of these things in order for a non-human to be a trustee. And therein lies the issue with a lot of the taxes. And one of the reasons I said that we want an LLC is just to contain the disasters, but also I mentioned for tax purposes, there's all kinds of tax complexities in these. And one of those is who is the manager of the LLC and what is their position? Because different types of financial professionals are taxed differently on the trades and the income from digital assets. And so, and same thing with real estate. So if we have for example, in real estate, if we have a trustee managing the real estate who has material participation, performs most of the services for the properties, and hits a certain yearly hourly requirement, then those properties are not limited for deductions on passive activity loss limitations, on at-risk limitations, on debt financing limitations. You get a lot more depreciation on your real estate by having a qualified real estate professional. Analogous to that, by having a broker or by having somebody who's an active trader versus a passive trader, we get different treatment on the income inside of these digital asset accounts. And so that is where I sometimes organize these for both asset protection, I mentioned, to contain the disasters, but then I said you always have a trifecta of considerations. Here we have some estate planning and tax considerations, but then the manager of this LLC would not be an algorithm, but might be a human, and we might have them qualified for a certain level of activity as regards these digital assets in order to give these digital assets certain tax attributes on the income. So that's another rationale for an LLC.
So for our listeners, Rustin, I'm gonna break this down to a very simplistic term they've heard me say before. When you're in the business of, then it's treated differently. And so what you were saying earlier about the real estate professionals are in the business of real estate, right? And so they've met certain requirements to be designated as that. So that allows them to take write-offs, like you were mentioning. There's depreciation. There's a lot of things that go into that. And so like within these, and again, like you explained this extremely well, I appreciate that. I'm dumbing it down a little bit. Well, not dumbing, I'm bringing the the information down a little bit for our listeners. But like when you're in the business of, it's a different tax, bracket. And like what you're saying with all these trusts, all these different LLCs, all these things that are in it, you can consider all of these little pieces as separate little people or separate little businesses that are all within there, and they're going to have that protection of being that, and they interact and they do business within, like you said, the protection right within that. And that's why you need multiple, because you wouldn't open a business and then open another business that, like, if this one something happened here, this one has to pay for it, right? Like you don't want that. You don't want that overflow. But if you had multiple businesses, you can make loans, right? Like that can occur, but those are essentially two different people that are saying, hey, I'm going to help you out, and then you owe me, right? We're not two different people that live the same. If you got two people living in the same house and one works out and eats right, and the other one doesn't, they shouldn't look the same, and the guy that works out and takes care of himself shouldn't have to have the body of the guy that eats Cheetos and plays video games till 7 a.m., right? And so, like, just to kind of bring that down to a little bit lower level, that's what you're saying when you're saying, like, they're treated differently. It's because they're in the business of doing that. And so these separations within the trust allow you to set up all those different entities. So you can have a consulting LLC that's for consulting. You can have a real estate LLC that's for your holdings. Hopefully, like you said, you have multiple LLCs that hold all those different properties. That way, if you have that bad situation where the dog bites somebody and they're suing and they're trying to take your property, they're not taking all the properties. They're going to take, one if it, comes up that way. But you can have these. You can have multiple LLCs that are doing multiple different things, and it's all going to be protected inside that specific one. But then additionally, like I loved your analogy of the double bagging. You have that second level of protection within that trust, which is fantastic, and Jake and I have been saying it for a long time. The trust is just a brilliant concept. And if you really want to be that millionaire that I know all of our listeners want to be, they want to be that millionaire now, and they want to be multimillionaires in the future, and they want generation after generations to be that. I don't know too many examples of multi-generational wealth that don't have a trust involved in it. Would that be something you would agree with, Rustin?
Absolutely. If you want it to go multiple generations, I hate to be so blunt, but there will be an idiot within a few generations who will ruin it all for you, unless if you have institution. If you've not institutionalized your family with a trust to protect your assets from those family members who are not so sophisticated, to put it euphemistically, you will have somebody tank your wealth for you. So the other thing I would mention, by being in the business of, you might have one management trustee who is a qualified real estate professional over here. You might have a different trustee who is Series 7 over here. For management purposes. So you can be a qualified purchaser and get in on certain deals of Dow shares over here. So you can get the right treatment here, the right treatment here, by having the right management trustees. So again, the trust permits you, and this is it's specifically in the regulations, that a trustee can qualify as the real estate professional here. They don't yet have a comparable regulation for crypto, but for other securities, they do have. For securities laws, you do have to have a trustee qualified to participate in a lot of the deals you'll probably want to get into. So again, in addition to having the LLCs, you might uncabin and separate out the different fiduciary responsibilities, the management responsibilities by type of business you're in the trust. But I think that if the trust is going to last for multiple generations, you've got to be into dirt, you've got to be into real estate and life insurance. Everybody's got a pulse and everybody needs a place to live. And those are the best ways to make money, off of people's insurance capacity on their pulse, or off of real estate where people need a place to live. Because apart from having good trustees, a family can certainly be the advisory committee and participate in the trust, but you've got to have qualified professionals in these areas to get preferential tax treatment. So it just is a pragmatic, if you want to be able to take your deductions on your real estate, if you want to be able to get preferable income tax treatment on your investments, you're going to need qualified professionals in all these areas and entities to separate out what you're in the business of doing.
Yeah, I agree. And so I do think that the new initiative or the new standard for being a crypto expert will be a Discord, a Twitter, and lots of posting on TikTok about how to be a crypto millionaire. I'm pretty sure that is going to be the restrictions.
I don't know. We'll see what the regs say. I think the regulations may hold to a little different, but we'll see.
But no, man, I love that, and that is really smart. And you can't have multiple people within that. You know, it takes a village to raise a child, right? It also takes a village to maintain multiple millions of dollars, right?
Absolutely.
So, smartest people in the world have amazingly smart, if not smarter, people in their corner. So having all those people inside of your trust, helping you to make that money, retain that money, maximize those dollars. That's smart business. So I love it. Yeah, that's great information, man. I love this chart. I love the way you laid it out. It makes a very complicated concept, not necessarily simple. But I think if people look at this and then they, watch this, and maybe you ought to watch it 2 or 3 times really to get it. But I really feel strongly that you've laid it out in a way that is understandable. And I think people will really get this, even if they have to listen to it a few times to get it. You're a very smart individual, definitely smarter than me. But I understand what you said and I love it. So
we're all specialists. Everybody's smart in their own domain. I have to rely on people for the food I eat that are smarter than me on food. So we're all specialists in something.
And for the people that are listening on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts or a different platform than YouTube, this will be up on my YouTube channel, which is the Block Biz YouTube channel, so that you can see the visuals that were presented here on the whiteboard in this discussion. If it's difficult to make it out over just the auditory versions on those platforms. So appreciate that, man, that you went over everything that I wanted to get into. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so through my law firm website, it's allegislaw.com. It's allegislaw.com. You can contact me through that. You can email me, Rustin at allegislaw.com, RUSTIN at ALLEGISLAW.com. I'm old school that way, not big on social media. I'm very private and will keep your information private, but hit me directly and we can talk about this.
That's wonderful.
And you're in Utah, correct?
Correct. I'm in Utah.
You're neighbors with Sean Whalen, right? Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, right next door.
Oh, yeah. Hello to him, wave at him after a barbecue.
I love it. I love it.
That's awesome, brother. Well, I appreciate you joining us on this episode, and we'll see y'all on the next one.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, guys.